In this example, we're going to try and emulate more the analog workflow, or specifically the console setup. So if you think about an analog mixing console, every single channel is exactly the same in terms of the electronics. And what that does is it colors every single thing you bring into it ever so subtly, ever so slightly. And it can lead to like a particular vibe. And it's hard to put it into words, but you've heard records from the 80s, and there's just a vibe about them that sounds different to records from the 70s, or even the music that you're listening to today, which sometimes it's not even going through any kind of console at all. It's just very clean, very pristine from start to finish. And that has its own unique effect, and it's an effect that I do enjoy. I like being able to hear that differentiation between all of the different parts, but for other people, they really crave that kind of, cohesive sound that you might be able to get from a console. So we're going to emulate a workflow similar to that, just kind of discuss what's happening, and hopefully when you see it in practice, it will make more sense to you. It's kind of hard to just describe. It's a lot easier to, I think, show. So the first step is going to be to get the gain staging right. And I like to always, if I'm going to do this kind of a process, have the preamplifier or the console channel be the first thing that I apply, just because it's easy to set that gain stage from the beginning, and I don't like doing it at the end. So I get this set up first, and then I apply any additional processing, and then get my balances that I need accordingly. So let's just jump in here and get started on this. We'll go through a couple examples, and we'll just fast forward the video to catch up. So what I'm going to need is a tool device, and I'm going to need our meter. So I can take those two guys, put this setting where I want it to be, and then I'm going to group these together. And I'm just going to name this gain stage. Again, if your DAW doesn't allow you to do that, it's totally fine. I'm just going to take this, and on each individual channel, I'm going to bring this over. Okay, so on the group, I'm just going to leave that be. I'm really only worried about the channels. All right, there we go. So now one at a time, I'm going to have to go and listen to what's happening here and adjust my gain accordingly. So let's bring up the meter. Cool. And now we'll go to the next thing, just making sure there's no other processing happening. Unfortunately, it doesn't save your calibration settings, so that's kind of annoying. This one's pretty close. And so you're just going to run through and do this for every single channel that you have at the beginning. So I'll fast forward through this video and then jump back in when there's something new that's something new that's happening the next stage in the process. All right, so I've taken care of the gain staging. Again, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect and identical all the way across, but you want to get it at least in the same ballpark. That's kind of the general idea here, because the next step is going to be to actually get our balance that we want to have set up. So it's fine to set the balance at this point, because what we're really going to want to do is make a final A-B comparison at the end. So we need to have the same balance set before we actually go in and apply that additional little preamp, because it's not really meant to add a whole lot of gain or make the biggest impact in the world. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to set the balance, and then we'll jump back in and add in Nebula and the preamp to hear what that's going to do to our sound. All right, so I've set a balance really quickly. In reality, I'd probably spend quite a bit more time trying to get this exactly the way I wanted it, or I should say the way I remembered it from before, but this is what we have. So the point here isn't to worry too much about the balance. What we really care about is hearing an A-B difference. So I'm just going to take the drums group here and I'm going to bounce this out. We'll bounce it pre-fader, that's fine. So here we have the original bounce. And now we just have to go in and figure out what version or what preamp, what program in Nebula do we want to use? And what I'm most concerned with here is what it's going to do to the low end, so specifically the kick drum. So I want to find a preamp that sounds good on the kick drum. And if I can find something that sounds good on the kick drum, I'm just going to trust it and I'm going to use it all the way across here. So let's go in and let's grab Nebula and start going through some preamps. So you can hear the big difference that one has. Sounds pretty good. And I'm not really all that concerned with following convention here. If I find something that I like, I'm going to trust it all the way across the board. So I don't care if it's necessarily designed for this purpose. It also sounds pretty good. That colors the sound very little, so that might be something worth going with. Let's try the high end. Not a big fan of that sound. And again, you may not be able to hear a difference at all. That's distorting. So we don't want that. Yeah, you know, I think I'm actually happiest with this one here, which I do believe is a master bus. So it would actually be what should be going on the master bus here at the end. But I like the way this sounds on the kick drum, so I'm willing to trust it and try it across the board. It may not sound good. It may not be worth applying. Maybe it makes more sense to just put this on the group, but we'll experiment and hear what we, or make judgments based on what we hear, not what we see or what we think follows standard convention. So let's try applying this all the way across the board. Hopefully this keeps the same settings. Let's just make sure it does. Yeah, it does. Cool. Cool, so we've applied that all the way across the board. Now we can take a listen. It has forced me to make some changes here. Cool, so we can go and we can bounce this drum group again. And hopefully it works. I'm a little bit nervous. Cool. So this is going to be our preamp version. We could also call it like console version. And now we just have to go in here and check to see what we prefer, or at the very least, what differences are we hearing. So here's the original. Let's check out and see what it's peaking at. Uh-oh, I might have something else soloed in here I'm a little worried about. All right, so I'm having a glitch happen here. So I'm going to figure out what the problem is, and we'll get back to this so we can hear a difference. I'm not going to go through and do that whole process again, that's for sure. All right, so what was only a few seconds for you was a few minutes for me, and that's just what happens sometimes. So I actually had to do, sometimes I think it's just good to tell people what's gone on. What I actually had to do was like rebounce the original again, and it worked. So I had the file and it just wasn't playing back, but if I went and I bounced it again, I then was able to hear audio. So what I've done is I've gone in here and I've set these up so that the peak value is roughly the same. It might be about zero point 0.1 dB different, but that's totally fine. What we're really listening to here is just the overall vibe of the sound. So let's listen to these back to back, starting with the original no preamp, followed by the version with the preamp. So here we go. So I actually like what the preamp has done. The one thing I'm not too fond of is how it's got rid of some of the high end. Some of the sparkle has kind of been taken out of this drum loop, some of the parts in there. So what I could do is go to the preamp version, apply another instance of Nebula here, and then go in. I'm actually going to turn it down just a little bit, just to give myself some room. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a high shelf. Have to turn the output down just a smidge. And then we could bounce this version out. So now what I want to do is I want to go through and listen to the three of these back to back to back, make some observations, and then what I'm going to do is have what I would say would be my final preferred version. So let's just listen to these three guys back to back to back, starting with the original, followed by the console style preamp, followed by a version that has the console style preamp plus an EQ. And it's going to be very interesting what ends up happening here. So let's listen to all three of these guys and then make some observations. So I actually probably personally do prefer this second version here. However, one thing I noticed when we added in the EQ is that it seemed to take away some of the power from the low end. And that might just be part of what happens when you run a signal like that through that particular EQ. So what I would probably do in this example is go with this preamp version, but then add more of a different software plugin EQ to it to try to bring the high end back in. So let's just experiment with that quickly and just focus on this one. What I'll use is I'll go with the TDR Nova. So I'd probably go with something like this, and then I might even go in and add a little bit of dynamic EQ. And there you go. So just a little bit of an example there of how you can use Nebula in a variety of ways. But remember, Nebula only can do certain things. So like you saw here, it made a lot of sense for me to then have to go and use some of our other plugins to bring it all back together to get it to sound the way I wanted. So let's compare the original to this version that I like and, leave it at there. So again, devil is in the details here, and this is by no means something that you have to do, but you can see how some of these nuances and details, when combined with some of the other techniques and processors and processes that we've learned, can really go a far way. Because I could just go in and use the TDR Nova, but if I was to do that without applying the preamp stage before, I'm not sure if it would work quite as well, or if it would just sound a little bit too disjointed. So this all sounds like it belongs together, and then we're really using this as just a little bit further enhancement, and I think it makes a pretty big impact when you listen to those two guys back to back.